Good, happy Wednesday. I'm glad that you could join me today. And as always, please jump into the chat and say hello. I'm flying solo tonight, so I don't have my mic backup checking your names for me. So if I don't address you by name, it's because you only come up as Facebook user for some reason in my in this broadcast software. Anyway, tonight we're going to talk about brain rest. It's a pretty simple topic, really, but I don't think it's one that we think about very much. And I know when I first heard the concept, and I heard it from my neurological physiotherapist, it was very new to me. So you don't typically hear people talking about brain rest unless maybe it has to do with a traumatic brain injury. So you know that if you've had a concussion or anybody you know has had a concussion, you know that the first thing that your doctor uh, tells you is rest your brain, right? So this might be obvious if you've had an accident or you've been hit by a car or something's whacked you in the head or you've had a bad fall. Brain rest makes sense. But what if that injury is internal? Um, and by internal, I mean a disease process. So the inflammation, oxidative damage, and demyelination that can be caused by MS is also considered a brain injury. And I think that's really important to think about and to understand because we always think about these big, obvious events, right? I've always asked my new patients whether they have sustained any kind of brain injury because I know they've got the internal process going on, but I want to know what we're dealing with, if we're dealing with one or if we're dealing with two. So for people, the brain injury, for people with MS, the brain injury can actually be internal and external. So we've got a double whammy going on there. Either way, it makes the whole concept of brain rest fairly essential. So let's talk about that concept of brain rest and just to understand it a little bit better. Your brain is always on. It's always working. It doesn't shut off. Every little thing that's going on in the body, across the body, happens without our conscious awareness, but it's happening in firings from the brain. Everything, sweating, peeing, thinking, um, uh, consolidating memories. All of these things require brain power. And there's also this massive communication, nonstop communication between the brain and all of the physiological functions in the gut, that massive microbiome that we always talk about, between brain cells themselves, and there's a lot of cells up there, and every process in every cell in the body. So it's just on, on, on. And all of these functions require uninterrupted neural activity. Um, all these functions can lead also to neural fatigue. That's that concept that I said I didn't really understand when I first heard about it. But the important thing to understand is the brain never switches off, not even when you're sleeping. So your brain actually fires as much or works as much when you're sleeping as it does when you're awake. And the brain consumes a full 20% of your total body's energy. That's a lot when you think of the real estate it occupies compared to the rest of the body, right? But that brain's primary function of processing and transmitting information through electrical signals is a very, very, very energy expensive function. So when demyelination occurs, then this can actually slow the process down and provide another challenge to the body, which can actually up the ante on how much energy is being required. So that is that neural fatigue that I was talking about. So let's take a closer look at what's going on in the MS brain. And I want you to imagine your central nervous system as a transportation grid. We've used detour analogies before, but in this transportation grid analogy, if there are streets that are blocked with traffic or whatever, the traffic will find a way around it. They will create a detour. And this change can take longer or can be a bumpier ride depending on the circumstances of what's going on. You still get there, the trip is still completed, but it'll just take longer and it takes more energy, right? So think of the neuroinflammation in MS as a huge delay in that grid. And it has the ability to exacerbate existing situations or cause new potholes, if you will, if we'll stick with this analogy. So it can cause things to get worse, or it can create new situations on its own. Demyelination can also only partially obstruct nerves, which can lead to interrupted nerve firing or nerve messages. And that's the bumpy ride that I was talking about. Anytime something's not running smoothly, it's going to be taking more energy to accomplish. So another thing, I guess, that could make a difference is where the damage is in the brain, whether it's in the brain or the spinal column. So all of these things make a big difference in the disruptions and the amount of energy that is required to overcome them. The good news is the brain has this amazing ability to adapt and create new routes, and we've been talking about this a lot in the 10 weeks to transform MS, about creating new pathways, the capacity that the brain has to do things in against all odds, really. And I want to think now about what causes these traffic jams or what causes these blockages that the brain has to work around. Well, the first one is probably no surprise to you. I'm just going to say hi to you guys. Hi, Renee. Hi, Rita. Hi, Aaron. Good to see you. So the three main things that cause this neural fatigue or this situations that require brain rest are, of course, stress, right? If you ever have a multiple choice exam on MS and you've got 4 answers and stress is among them, pick stress, because it's probably usually generally the answer. But stress just causes that neuroinflammation, right? That causes that obstruction that the brain has to work around. So chronic stress without relief demands brain rest. So you really need brain rest if you're chronically stressed. The second one, hey Kara, is overwork. So if you do a lot of intellectually challenging work, you can overdo it. Multitasking, things like that, where your brain, it just doesn't get a break. I'll never forget when I wrote my certification exams for the Institute for Functional Medicine, and I experienced this big time firsthand because my brain hurt and I was so exhausted. And this was I've never written an exam that was so hard. Hey, Kristen, how you doing? I'd never written an exam that was so hard in my life. And it really hurt. It really, really hurt. And the last one, of course, is overstimulation. And this is one I don't think we really realize. It can be, in a crowded place with too many people, but that stimulation can also be like a million signs around. I don't know if you realize that when there's signs everywhere, your brain is always looking and trying to capitulate what's going on. So we've got stress, we've got overwork, and we've got overstimulation. That overstimulation can also be noise. It can be temperature. So it just sensory overload. So think of all the ways that your senses can be overloaded. These pretty much sound like everyday events, don't they? And that's because they are. So, what does that mean? Brain rest becomes a really super important part of your self care. And it helps to rejuvenate your own body. Hey, Christopher, it sure has been a while. Good to see you, my friend. So, there's different ways to engage in brain rest. And it can be as simple as 10 minutes a day. Jump in the chat and tell me if this concept is resonating with you and what kind of things you do to rest your brain. And the first one, I've got my notes tonight because I'm actually pretty brain drained myself tonight. But the first thing I think of when I think of brain rest is just putting a cloth over my eyes and sort of shutting the world out. That can be a warm compress of some kind. That can also be your castor oil pack, right? So your castor oil pack is a great thing to just put over the eyes and just to get that brain rest. The first one, of course, and this is the one that you will know if you've ever had a concussion. What do they tell you? They tell you to unplug, right? No screen time. We have excessive amounts of screen time in our lives. So to be able to turn off those screens, especially when they're this close, or closer with phones and such. So turning that stimulation off, because it's not just, it's a lot of things, right? There's a lot. If you could see my screen right now, I've got 50 tabs open. I've got my broadcast software open. There's a lot going on the screen, but then you've also got the brightness. So, and it could be argued, the EMFs that come from the screen. So unplug, number one. The second one is meditate. Meditation is just good. I mean, if you don't have meditation in your self-care toolbox, you need to be adding that, because it just calms the body down in general. It calms that whole central nervous system down. It's really an MS power tool. So empty your mind of that constant chatter, that constant stimulation. Close your eyes and just breathe. Visualization, guided meditation works here. And you know what? There's all kinds of apps now, and there's all kinds of great resources on YouTube. I've got a new favorite app. For a long time, it was calm.com, which is still a great app. But now I am just hooked on the Plum Village app. That's Plum as in Plum Village. And that is Thich Nhat Hanh's community that he built in France. Of course, Thich Nhat Hanh died earlier this year, but his legacy lives on in Plum Village, and they've done a bang-up job of their app. It's got so many options, and even if you've never meditated before, it's a little bit. It's very simple meditation because, of course, Thich Nhat Hanh was a Zen master, but it's a beautiful one. So, punchline: meditation is a great way to get some brain rest. Yoga and the yogic breathing exercises are a great way to allow your brain to rest. Basically, what are we seeing here? It's about calming that central nervous system, right? Getting us out of that stress response and into the relaxation response. So your body's sensory overload is cut in half, right? Remember what we said, that the brain is still working even when you're sleeping. But if we can shut down a lot of the stimulation that's happening in our awakeness, then we're literally cutting that stimulation in half. Reducing sensory stimuli, so creating environments that are calmer to us. So staying away from the big crowds, the festivals, the shopping malls, even driving on the highway, with all the signs everywhere. So just changing your environment to support a calmer and more peaceful uh, situation for resting your brain. Um, another good option is just finding alone time. We're so busy nowadays, and of course we've been shut in for the last 3 years with everybody around us. So um, finding some time to be alone and to do something that's soothing and relaxing instead of always being on. And finally, taking a nap. Remember what I said about cutting that stimuli in half. We know the brain's still working when we're sleeping, but at least when we're sleeping, we don't have all the other external stuff. So, all of these things will provide the brain with some much needed rest, reduce inflammation, and reduce the potential for subsequent uh, and further damage, sort of internal damage. So the Mike has now joined me just as we're finishing up here. Hi, Debbie. Debbie listens to soothing music. Yeah, absolutely. You know what I do? YouTube. I just Google meditation music, and there's so many places now that have like 3 hours of pre-recorded meditation music. And even when I'm working, it could be argued that it's another stimulus, but at least it helps to calm me down a little bit when I'm working at my computer. Is there anything else anybody wants to share about how you bring brain rest into your day or your night or your afternoon, how as it were? Like I said, it's a pretty basic concept, but pretty essential as our list of self care items. Um, I was going to say as our list of self care items grows, but the more self care we're doing, the less that we need to worry about having a shopping cart full of supplements, right? Anyway, there you go. Those are my thoughts for tonight. I hope they were helpful in some way for you. And I hope you have a nice evening. I'm off right now to give myself some much needed brain rest. Have a great night. Bye bye.